Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the Secret Resume podcast, hosted by me, Melody Moore. In this podcast, we explore the people, places, and experiences that have shaped my guests, those which have influenced who they are as people and where they are in their work life today. You can listen in as we have a rich exploration of often unexamined and undiscussed, but very important aspects of their lives, or as I like to call it, their secret resume. My guest today is Nadia Nagamootoo. Nadia, thank you so much for joining me. Really happy to have you here. And before we dive into your secret resume, can you just tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do for a living?
Absolutely. So yes, my background is as a chartered psychologist, and I specialize in the area of business psychology. So I spent a number of years, about 20, in fact, in all sorts of organizations, both internally, so I worked in local government for a while, as well as externally in consultancy, designing leadership development programs, facilitating, and specializing, I suppose, in culture change transformation, as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion, of course. So my business is Avenir, and at Avenir, we work globally with organizations to help them with creating a more inclusive culture. And that can be anything from supporting them with their diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. So, for example, we have an inclusion survey tool where we can really measure and understand how different people are experiencing the organization. And that can be a really helpful benchmark for organizations to understand where to focus their time, energy, money, and in particular, specializing in leadership development, so inclusive leadership. And we have a program that we work with organizations to support leaders in understanding this very knotty, complex subject of what it looks like and what it means to them and to the organization. So yeah, I'm a accredited coach as well, and I've got an executive MBA from Henley Business School. I live in South London. I have 2 daughters and a husband, and yeah, I absolutely love what I do.
Brilliant. You can always tell when people love what they do because you can see it shines out of them when they talk about their job. So let's go right back to so even pre you, I think, the beginning of your story. You were going to talk a bit about your mum and her experience of moving here to the UK. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So for those who don't know me, I am Mauritian from a heritage perspective. So both my parents were born and brought up in Mauritius. And, they were, from a low income family, really, both of them. My mum in particular, her dad was a carpenter, and she was one of 5. And so from a financial perspective, they didn't have a lot. I mean, she tells me stories of her going to school and being literally sat down in a classroom of about 60 children on the floor sharing books. They had like one between 3 of them or something reading these books. So there, it is an incredible upbringing if you think about sort of the difference between her upbringing and mine, just the next generation. Yeah, I was born and brought up, and my brother in England, and so our education and our upbringing it's almost hard for me sometimes to connect with her reality of her stories when she tells me about how she was, how she grew up in Mauritius and some of the challenges. They'd have, sometimes they wouldn't have electricity. Sometimes they, the things that they would eat for breakfast are things like rice and bread. And, it's very different to my own upbringing. And I really admire my mum for, I suppose, just how brave, the courage to leave a small island. Obviously, Mauritius is a small island, and come over here. She married Dad, came over here, didn't know anyone. And had to find work, had to she was fluent in English. It was not a problem in terms of her language, although obviously it was a second language, having said that. And, at the time we're talking, 70s, early 70s, people in England weren't overly welcoming of, people of any sort of other background, particularly people of colour. And so there was a huge amount of microaggressions that she faced in the workplace, and dad too, obviously, he experienced similar. But I remember my mum sharing with me, it's absolutely what we would know and class as bullying behaviour, and microaggressions, people making comments about her accent, people making comments about how her lunch smelled, because it was, of course, of an ethnic background, and she would bring things in that people didn't recognize, and so she constantly needing to fit in, constantly needing to belong. And I don't think I've really properly spent time thinking about how, like, walking in her shoes at that time back in the early 70s. It's hard for me because obviously I was born in the 80s and I was born here, but if I really take time to think about what she must have experienced, it would have been incredibly tough. How do you build some friendships? How do you get any legitimacy in your working environment when it's quite clear that, well, you don't belong in so many different ways, but yet you're trying to fit in, you're trying to belong, and yet there's so many signals that are coming your way that suggest that you don't. And what do you do with those messages? How does it undermine you, who you are, your confidence? So, but yet she was so wanting for my brother and I to live in England and experience and feel like we belonged here, I should say. And so she would do anything and everything to make sure that our lives were set up for success. She put in so much time and energy into tutoring me, as I remember, and I was, quite a headstrong young girl. Some would argue that I'm still a headstrong woman. But yes, I was particularly headstrong, and I would push back and say, oh, I don't want to do that. Why do I have to do this? It's the weekend, And I remember sitting down with her, working through additional sort of schoolwork, textbooks, books that she'd bought to make sure that my brother and I had the best chance of getting an education. Knowing that, she never said to me, because we are different, you need to work harder. But that's the message that I took. That's the message I took. And there was only about 3 miles down the road, there was an all-girls grammar school, and actually similarly an all boys grammar school for my brother. And she worked with both of us. My brother's older, so he went first to the all boys grammar, and I passed the 11 plus through her tutoring, through her hard work, to get into this all girls grammar. And that for me, I think for her was parenting job number one done, in terms of, there's lots of other parenting jobs, obviously it might not have been number one, but it was a big tick on her list for sure, to get us both into a high quality education. So, and I think so important, because of our minority background, for her to feel that actually she's given us the best chance in life. And so my drive, everything that I do, fundamentally is because she offered, and my dad obviously collectively offered me a platform to thrive, so I took that opportunity with both hands, and I was like, and I ran with it. So yeah, that's my one of my key drivers in life, is to make it worth it, if that makes sense. Like all that effort and time and
Mm.
what my mum did to coming over from England, everything that she went through, kind of feel like it's my duty to make the most, to do something worthy with my life, so that I can say to her, it was worth it. Thank you.
And do you feel it is? Do you have that sense of satisfaction?
You know what? In my 40s now, early 40s, have to say, it's so rewarding to look at and I rarely do it, I have to say, and people are always stopping me going, Nadia, it's amazing what you're doing. It's amazing what you've done. And I very rarely would stop and pat myself on the back. But when someone like you has just asked me, I have to, with all honesty, say, yes, I'm so proud of, I suppose, all those little things that I've done, which have accumulated over time, you know. So from my undergraduate degree, my postgraduate degree in occupational psychology, my MBA, you know, which I won a scholarship for. So it was a fully paid scholarship sponsored by the Financial Times and Henley Business School. You know, setting up Avenir, generating clients and income, you know, actually clients who keep coming back because they enjoy working with us, they trust us, all of that. Those, I call them little things, because I don't really stop and think, well, because it's, to me, it's just normal, it's just what happens. I put in the hard work, and you know, people want to work with us, and it's wonderful. But I don't stop to think, like writing the book, it's I just did it, you know, I decided, and I cracked on and did it. But if I do stop and answer a question like that, I'll be like, yeah, I do hope that I've made every moment count and I've contributed to something bigger, which is my ultimate drive, to contribute to something bigger than me. It's, you know, I'm a small, tiny cog in a big system, but I do believe that even the smallest of cogs can make a big difference with continual work and effort. And that's what I do every day. That's why I wake up at, you know, in the morning, sometimes at silly o'clock in the morning on a Saturday and Sunday before the kids wake up, so that I can put in a few hours, because I believe very strongly and passionately that creating a more inclusive workplace and inclusive society it matters.
And your parents, are they still around? What do they think of what you're doing?
Yes, they are. Yeah. In fact, that's where my two daughters are today, because it's school holidays. They, you know, I think they're proud. I hope they're proud. They, I suppose, in a way, sometimes don't quite understand what I do, not fully. But let's face it, I don't, you know, even my husband doesn't fully know what I do. And I quite honestly don't really know what he does. All I see is two screens and spreadsheets and numbers. He's an accountant. So do we really know what anyone else does apart from, you know, what we do? So I think that I don't know whether they quite understand how the impact of their journey in life. I've never told them specifically, because of you, and partly, but you know, that this has driven me to do what I'm currently doing. Yeah, so maybe if they knew that, they could understand a little bit more about my drive. I think sometimes it comes a bit sort of, because my mum used to call me her little tornado when I was like in my sort of teenage early 20s. Like I would and I haven't stopped, and that's the thing. Like, so I know that I can be a little bit overwhelming to some who have a bit more take it easy nature about them, and a bit more of a, you know, time is plentiful. And I'm very much a oh, we don't have, there's so much to
No,
do.
it's not.
There's so much to do in such little time. And I've got all these things I want to cram in. And so hence I can be a little bit sort of like, okay, Nadia's in the room. Let's get stuff done. I know it can be a pitfall, and I suppose in my 40s, I can appreciate how and have learned to navigate that as well, and tone it down when I need to. But at the same time, what my parents see is just me working, kids, juggling. Like, I drop off, I'm at my desk, and then I'm picking up, and then I'm dropping to a club, and then I'm back at my desk, and then, and in between I'm doing the shopping, I'm, cooking dinner, and, managing a house. And yeah, I think they think that there's more than 24 hours in my day.
You probably wish that there were. So tell me about then. So you went to the girls' grammar school. You said that was a predominantly white school.
Yeah, at the time, we're talking 1992, when I was first started high school, and it was predominantly, it's absolutely. So I was just finished actually 5-year term as governor there at that same high school. Nice. So I wanted to give back. And my goodness, has the demographic changed. But 1992, I was one of 3 ethnic minority girls. It's an all-girls school, so ethnic minority girls in a sea of white middle class. And yeah, it was tough in a number of ways. Constantly feeling like I had to try to fit in, maybe even not quite having a full voice in the room because of it, I would say. But definitely, I wasn't shy to put up my hand. I would, contribute in class. But there was certainly groups of girls where I didn't really feel comfortable. They had something in common that was definitely not something that I had in common with them. And I don't think I quite put, I was obviously 12, 13, 14, wouldn't quite put my finger on it at the time, but I just knew I wasn't comfortable. And I didn't feel accepted necessarily. And I felt that a few times in my life. But I suppose for sure, school is a unique place and unique time in your life where you can really, and it's a hard time because you're a teenager and you're uncomfortable in yourself anyway, and you still don't really know who you are. But yeah, I did my absolute best to fit in, and I think I did it in a way that almost let go of my Mauritian heritage. I let go of my Mauritian heritage, and I didn't know I'd done it. So it was completely unconscious, but I was so wanting to assimilate to this white environment that I just ignored and thought, well, if I just ignore the fact that I have brown skin, then maybe that will help me to belong. And bizarrely, and this is a very strange story as I say it out loud, but I didn't realize what I had done and how much I'd let go of my, I'm going to say brownness, and I just mean, just me as a Mauritian woman, until my early 30s. So I just did not associate with being an ethnic minority for about 15 to 20 years of my life. And I say that with a smile because it is a bit strange. But I just didn't want to. I didn't want to, because if I acknowledge my difference, then that means that people will see me differently, and I just wanted people to see me like everyone else. Of course that isn't true. Of course they would still see my difference, but that was my logic. I just wanted to belong, and so I just didn't want people to see. So I tried to act and be as white as possible.
I find it really interesting what you're saying, because I've, done and been involved with a lot of development programs for underrepresented talent, and I hear people say this, that they
Right.
kind of reject the idea of having a program for ethnic minorities, for women, whatever group that we're working with. And it's really interesting to hear what you're saying about why you rejected that. What happened in your early 30s then that made you realise that that's what you'd done?
There was a specific moment, actually. So I was working for a consultancy, and there was a specific moment, maybe it was late 20s now, thinking about it, but when the founder of the company came into the room where I was sitting, and he was like, "We're putting in a tender for some work, and it's specifically for like a positive action ethnic minority program. Are you okay for me to refer to you as an ethnic minority consultant?" And it really took me aback, because I paused for a moment, and it seems strange, but because because I'd let go of that part of my identity, I actually had to process what he was saying and say, well, yes, because I am. But it felt so uncomfortable for me to acknowledge it. And it was that moment that I realized that I had completely let go of that part of my identity. Um, but I didn't do anything about it at that point. I was just like, oh, that was
Mm.
interesting. Hmm. And then into my 30s, did I have further conversations as I started to get more into diversity, equity, and inclusion, my mid 30s, very much so, which was kind of around the time when I was doing my executive MBAs. There was other conversations coming out. And it's only when I've entered really having these conversations around difference, around race and racism, uh, around terms like coconut.
Mm.
Yeah, so you're brown on the outside, white on the inside. Obviously, a derogatory term. It's not
Mm-hmm.
I don't refer to anyone like that or myself, but just as I've come across these terms
Yeah.
and concepts, have I realised? So it's been a gradual process. It wasn't like a, a significant moment, but it's just several conversations. Was like suddenly realised this is what I've been doing. This is what I've done.
And what
Um,
did that look like? You said you kind of, you know, denied your ethnicity, or denied it to yourself, it sounds like. So,
mm,
what does that look like in practice? Well, how were you, how did you start behaving differently? And how have you started or have you started behaving differently now that you're in a different headspace around it?
yeah. Um, it's probably subtle. It's probably subtle, bearing in mind that I have practiced not being an ethnic minority for probably longer than I've practiced being, and acknowledging that part of my identity. But I absolutely acknowledge that part of my identity now. I very much welcome it. I'm very proud of it, um, because it's my story. It's who I am, and obviously I started by sharing the story even before I was born. It started
Mm.
then. It started, before my mum. My story is the generations that came before me, and all that they carry, and all the trauma that comes with being an ethnic minority person, even though I haven't personally experienced significant like trauma in the sense of how we might think of trauma. But it's generational trauma
Mm-hmm.
that I carry, and so I process it now. I've done a lot more, obviously, reading as a diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner, professional. Of course, I've done so. I have an understanding of how my ethnicity influences and impacts how the world interacts with me, and so it's constantly there now. It's constant. So because I'm so attuned to that part of who I am. Um, I'm much more aware of how it influences how people see me, how they view me, and how it influences my interactions.
Mm. And what about with your daughters? Does it influence, in the same way that your mum, was really focusing on education because she, had that belief that you needed to, because you needed to prove yourselves. Has that kind of gone down to the next generation then in your daughters?
Yeah, well, I absolutely can't deny that I support my daughters as much as possible in their education. And I think it wouldn't make sense, given what I know in terms of psychology, that how I was brought up doesn't feed into how I bring up my children. I think we can acknowledge that would be present. Interestingly, so my daughters are of mixed heritage. So my husband is a white male, British, and so they could, without seeing mum and dad next to them, they could look particularly tanned,
Mm-hmm.
like so white and particularly
Mm-hmm.
tanned, or maybe even Mediterranean. I think people, if they, with the absence of my husband and I, they could look at them and just not really be able to put their finger on the ethnic background of our two daughters. And fascinating as well is that the youngest is only 3, only just turned 3 as well. So I don't really have that much of a conversation with her about this yet, but the eldest is going to be 10 next month. So I can, and I do. And she just sees our family unit as completely normal. Like there's never been a question for her rather, that, how come mummy's got brown skin and daddy's got white skin, and look at me and how I'm a bit different from some of the other white children in the class, or how I'm a bit different from some of the ethnic minority, but when both parents are from an ethnic minority background, so some of the brown or black children in her class. She just, it's wonderful almost to see the world through a 9-year-old eyes, where she just sees everyone for who they are, and whether she it's not about their skin color, whether she gets on with them or likes them or plays with them. It's just whether she likes them or not, just their personality. So I'm aware. I have conversations with her about race, age appropriate, obviously, race and ethnicity. And I share a story in the book, actually, of a really challenging parenting moment. When she was about 5, I think it was, she'd gone for a play date at a white family friend's house. And I picked her up, and on the way home, she says that, so the older brother had a friend over as well. So it was her and the daughter, and then 2 boys, and they'd been playing in the garden. And she says, "Oh, mummy, we played a game called Black Man." And I was like, "Okay, do you want to, what did this game involve?" And she said, "Well, we pretended that there was a black man hiding in the trees, and then we all had to each take it in turns to try and get as close to the tree as possible. And if the others shouted 'Black man,' we had to run away as fast as we could." And I was there's this moment of just shock, but also, oh my goodness, like, I need to now have a conversation with a 5-year-old to explain why that game was absolutely inappropriate, and that I don't want her to play it again. So we have had moments like that where I have addressed things where it's been clear, or moments where I look at on the TV or in a film and I say, what's absent in this film? What's absent? What aren't you seeing? So I try to help her look at the world with a critical eye. Who are the bad characters in this book? How are they depicted? And it's not all about ethnicity and race. It's obviously about gender. It's about, representatively what we're seeing in children's TV programs and books. And it's got much, much better.
Yeah.
But of course, we're not just reading the most contemporary books, we're reading some of the old classics too. So I think it's really important to have those conversations, so that she can recognize and understand her heritage and how it's beautiful. You know, she's a beautiful mix of heritage, and that she can be proud of that.
Yeah. So we started talking about your daughter. We were planning to anyway. So that was when you first set up your company, yes? That around the time that you had her.
So I had her in January 2014, and I set up Avenir in January 2015.
And so had you gone back to work in that time, or was this a sort of post maternity leave setting up the business? How did that work?
Yeah, so so it's fascinating you asked this. There's a story here. So 5 months after having her, I was looking for a new opportunity. I'd been working in my current organisation, the local authority, for about 4.5 years. And I was thinking, actually, I'd like a change. And a friend of mine saw this advert. It'd come her way with 2 days left until the applications closed, to apply for a scholarship to do an executive MBA at Henley Business School. And I was breastfeeding still. I was sleep deprived. But she was like, you need to do this. This is you. Do it. Apply. Try. So my husband came home on a Friday night. The deadline was Sunday. And I said, I think I'm going to do something a bit silly. But I'd like to try. And he asked me to write an article about sort of what was the most limiting thing to female progression. And I already had the answer. I already kind of had thought about what my essay would say. So I just bashed it out over a 48-hour period, including the application form, getting references. It was a bit, my husband took little one and then kept bringing her back so I could feed her. And then I just put her back in his arms and he went off. And then the next week I found out I'd won the scholarship. And so I started that in October 2014 when she was 10 months. And I thought, gosh, you know what, maybe this isn't the right time to move companies as well. This is a lot. I've got a small baby and I'm starting executive MBA. Let me just stay where I am. But when I went back to work, I found that my position that they'd given me was 2 grades lower than when I left.
Wow.
Now, legally they could do it because over the years that I'd worked in this particular organisation, they promoted me but never officially promoted me. So I'd always got these short-term contract, covering maternity, that sort of thing. So my contract said I was sort of 4 grades lower than when I'd left. And so when they brought me back 2 grades lower than when I'd left, they thought, well, it's still better than where you started. And I was like, yeah, but I wasn't happy. And me being, as I've mentioned, quite a headstrong individual, as I was just like, I think I can do this by myself. So I spoke to my husband and I was like, I think I'm just going to quit my job and set up my own company. And you know what? I say this to many people about my husband. He is one of the most supportive people in my life. He is. And for every crazy moment where I've gone, I think I'm going to do this, he's gone, okay, what do you need? And so that's how Avenir was born. 1 year after my baby, and it's actually a 3rd baby now for me, as you can probably imagine. The book is a 4th. So,
And what does Avenir mean?
So with my Mauritian heritage, which is sort of speaking a dialect of French, I have a real affinity for French. I did French A-level as well. So in French, Avenir means future. So for me, it was, I love the word anyway. It kind of rolls off the tongue, Avenir, but it means future. And for me, it's such a positive, hopeful word.
Lovely. Yeah, my company has an Italian name, which I have no connection to Italy other than going there quite a lot, but I just liked the word because it means freedom, to be free.
Yeah.
So similar kind of, just like the
Yeah.
idea of it. Talk to me a little bit about some of the workshops. You said that some of the workshops that you have run as part of your company have been, some have kind of put you on that road to writing your book, to having the thinking about why you would do it. Do you want to tell me a little bit about those?
Yeah, I can. So, I mean, I've facilitated workshops with leaders globally now, and there are some moments that have really made me pause and think, because diversity, equity, and inclusion and being an inclusive leader is tough. It's not easy because there's almost competing arguments around leadership. So I'm told that I should treat everyone fairly and equally and the same. And I'm told differently from an inclusion perspective that I need to treat everyone based on their own individual needs, in a different way, and that's what fairness is. And so, one particular individual in a workshop said, "Well, look, I don't really understand. I don't get what you're telling me to do, because at the end of the day, we're all human, and I treat everyone exactly the same way, with respect, with fairness, and that's what I'll continue doing." And it really made me, so through those many conversations, I learned, and through observation, that there were different sticking points when it came to inclusive leadership, and what was stopping people, what was holding them back from being really willing to act in a way that was what we are, I suppose, suggesting is inclusive. And I don't say I have completely the right answer when it comes to this. I don't dictate what inclusion is or looks like. However, if we want people to really start doing the work internally about their own lived experiences, their own privilege, unearned advantages, the lens that they see the world, that inclusion ultimately isn't just about how you are with other people and how inclusive you lead. It's about how you lead yourself, and how willing you are to do the deeper work on yourself to understand your own lens, why you see something in a certain way and why someone else might see it differently. So how receptive are leaders to learn about themselves and about other people? And how does that drive a willingness to act in an inclusive way? And there was through conversations in workshops, I could really hear that people weren't willing, they weren't receptive to learning about themselves and about other people. They just thought, well, look, this is the way I lead. I know I've had good feedback. I know that I lead fairly, treat everyone with respect, and I don't see any other way that I need to be. And that is limiting to inclusion. That is limiting to inclusion, because if you lead in a sense that, well, I know I'm right, there's no other way it could be, without curiosity, without actually wanting to understand how your lens influences your leadership and therefore impacts different people in different ways, then we have a bit of an issue. And so I was hearing it multiple times in different ways. Some people saying, well, I kind of understand what you're saying, but I don't see it. I don't visibly, I haven't witnessed this as an issue. And so they're looking for answers when equity and inequities are often intangible.
And so that led you to the concept for the book. Is that how it kind of led into thinking, I need to write about this?
Yeah. So I accumulated all of these conversations and just started thinking, gosh, so the book is based on a 2x2 framework, so a model.
Of course, you're a consultant,
So-
and we love a 2x2 framework.
A good
It's our
old 2x2.
favourite.
Exactly. And it's accessible, and it's, you know, it's clearly simplified in terms, you know, I don't ever suggest that people fit into a box. However, I think my aim really was to provide a useful framework for people to reflect, and that's the purpose of it. So I've created these 4 ways of being, and a way of being isn't fixed in time. You know, sorry, it's not fixed as a person. It's about how you see the world and how that influences what you do, what you say, and ultimately how inclusive you lead. And so there are some people who are less receptive to learning about themselves, and others less willing to act. And that's because they do believe the pendulum swung too far in the opposite direction. One of my sort of workshop participants said, you know, I'm scared now for my 3 blue-eyed white boys, you know, that they're not going to be accepted in the workplace, that they're not going to have the opportunities that I hope they will. You know, so that fear and concern that diversity, equity, and inclusion is taking things to an extreme, which will limit obviously people's willingness to do anything if they feel that way. Then there's people who are really open to doing the work, being inclusive. They're very pro inclusion, but they're less receptive to learning. So they feel they're as inclusive as it gets already. So why do I need to put in more work or effort? I do what I do. I treat everyone the same, treat everyone fairly, kind of like the person I was speaking about before. And that again limits them in terms of their ability to be inclusive if they feel like there's no more further work for them to do. And then we have people who are really receptive to learning. They're curious, they want to understand, but unless they see it and experience it themselves, they're not sure whether it actually exists. And so without data to prove how much extra should we give, I'm just going to use gender, so, you know, women or non-binary individuals compared to men, in order to make it equitable, because we can't measure that stuff, they really struggle. So they're less willing to act. And of course we have leaders who lead beyond discomfort, which is the name of the book, and the space which really shows that willingness to learn, to do the deep inner psychological work, to have courage to say, I don't quite understand this, but I'd like to learn more, to say I got it wrong and now I understand better, you know, to be able to say, I need you to help me here, because even though I'm a leader, I don't have all the answers. To be able to look at each individual country and know that a global strategy won't necessarily work there, and to be able to navigate some of the political legal issues that might limit certain people in organizations to be there who they are. All of that is uncomfortable. So how do we lead beyond discomfort to be receptive to learning about ourselves, learning about other people, and being then willing to do something, to take action, to be an ally, to be an advocate, to make change?
Do you have thoughts? It may be in the book, maybe not. Maybe you've got some thoughts on, you know, the where people are more in the there is no issue here. You know, perhaps more in the I don't want to. I don't think there's a need. What organize? You know, that's where organisations think think really struggle. Do you have a thought of how you can approach those people, or if you should even?
So it's a good question, because the challenge here is that unless they're willing to be open to an alternative perspective, and they don't get defensive or angry, you know, we need people to be able to receive, to be willing to learn, in order for change to happen ultimately. So the purpose of the book is, it's not aimed, for example, at a DEI practitioner who's trying to influence change. It's for those leaders to, so the book is for the leader who feels sometimes, maybe not always, sometimes feels that actually this is really unfair now because people in the majority groups are being discriminated against. It might not be their complete stance every single time when it comes to DEI, but they might feel it sometimes. And so the book, the way I've written it, helps people to see if that particular way of being resonates with them at times, where it might resonate, how it can evoke and activate emotions within them, and encouraging them to reflect on where that comes from. And at the end of each chapter, there's sort of questions of discomfort. And so I leave people with, I suppose, whether they want to delve deeper into this, to answers, maybe some of the questions resonate with them that they feel could, if they answered it, it might help them better understand themselves. I really think the ownership here isn't for anyone to try and change people, but for people to recognize that that we all need to do the inner work. And I hope I hope that it serves that purpose, and that people do read it with that in mind. This isn't about judging people about what's right and wrong, what's more inclusive, what's not inclusive. This is about really supporting people to understand how some of their belief systems, their values might might benefit from just continuous reflection and evaluation. And it might be that you end up in the same place where you started, but the sheer process of being asked a question and being invited to explore it, I hope will open up a more, certainly a receptiveness to learning, and hopefully more willingness to act.
Do you feel optimistic? There's a lot of commentary around DEI being under threat, being budgets being slashed, roles being removed. How are you feeling about the world of DE&I at the moment?
I think that DEI is suffering from being an industry, or that's grown so quickly and almost too quickly for it to be able to catch up with itself. And what I mean by that is that from 2020, COVID, Black Lives Matter, and everything that came with this huge surge and need to talk more about diversity, equity, inclusion came, it's almost like it hit everyone so hard. It's like probably in your face, diversity, equity, inclusion. It is everywhere. It's spoken about everywhere. And people then get fatigued with that sort of thing. Not only do they get fatigued, but they also, the message gets delivered potentially in a way that isn't managed as well. So we have so many people entering the space. People who had a completely different background. So I had obviously an occupational psychology, business background already, specializing in leadership development and culture change and all of that. So I wasn't new to the area. But we have had people completely new to the area, and I'm not, some of them are fantastic, but not all of them are fantastic, and not all of them have been driving the same message and with as much care as it probably needed to. This is not an easy topic. It's not an easy conversation to have with anyone. It typically brings up a huge host of emotions. It can bring up defensiveness, anger, frustration. And there needs to be someone who is adept and skilled at being able to navigate that. And I think that that's probably where some of the issues lies now. So in a way, it's sort of like a rebalancing itself. It probably grew too quickly initially, and now we're sort of just getting to a balance. So I think the good DEI practitioners those who are really making substantial change that's measurable and very clear, and creating these more inclusive workplaces and societies. I think that that's clear, and that work will continue.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I agree. I think what I see happening is that, particularly you were talking about people feeling fearful, and I see a lot of almost trying to make people fearful, and no one's going to operate in a different way from a place of fear and being judged.
Exactly.
And there's too much of that, I think, of and not enough of dialogue, really, realistically.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much. That's really loved hearing so much about your. I'm absolutely desperate to read it now. It's going to be that's out in March.
Oh,
Do you have a date in March that
it's
coming out?
it's the 26th of March.
26th of March. Okay, fantastic. Speaking of books,
it's available to pre-order. Obviously, on
it's
Amazon.
Available now. Is it to pre-order?
Yes, it is available. Yes,
Fabulous.
exactly.
Fabulous. So we will include a link in the show notes so you.
Thank you.
What would be another book that you would recommend to the listeners? What's one of your favourites?
Well, I have to say, I have read so many powerful books on diversity, equity, and inclusion, because obviously it's a topic close to my heart, but also because in my podcast this season, Why Care, I have interviewed as guests people who have written books in the DEI space. So some of my favourites are Amber Cabral's book, which is called Say More About That, as well as Jenny Vasquez Newsom's book, which is called Untapped Leadership.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant, thank you. I will include links to both of those as well in the notes. And what would be some advice to your younger self? It doesn't have to be you as a child. It could be 3 weeks ago younger. It's just an older, previous version of yourself. What advice would you give?
So if I could talk to myself back at school, it would be to let go of that deep need to fit in and belong, and to be myself, because actually if I had just been myself back at school, there was absolutely a group of individuals who I connected with, that I could show that to, and who I felt accepted by. And yeah, it's so much easier said than done, of course. But just to give that word of encouragement that I will find myself, that I will feel confident in who I am. And if I could have got that sooner, that would have been amazing. But obviously it wouldn't make me the person I am today if I hadn't had that experience. So.
Yeah, there's that whole sliding doors thing. If you changed something in the past,
exactly,
you wouldn't be where you are. Great. Thank you so much for coming on the Secret Resume podcast. It's been really fascinating to hear your story and to hear about what inspired your book. And it sounds like a really great and practical read for leaders who are maybe a bit more reflective and willing and wanting to develop themselves. So I think it's going to be fabulous. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. This podcast is brought to you by Liberare Consulting, with editing provided by Hawkins Social. If you enjoyed today's episode, why not click on the subscribe button so you are the first to hear about new episodes. We look forward to welcoming you back soon.